All right, so we have our beautiful Miss Ziva in today. So Ziva has worked with me in the past. So she has come to me for puppy kindergarten. Nice. And she also went through some of my reactive dog class as well. So I know a lot of times, obviously, when we're dealing with behavior, for a lot of folks, obviously, it can be a bit overwhelming. And for the dog too. So remember that a lot of behavior, nice, is stems from a few different places. So obviously genetics make up 20 to 40% of your babe. So if let's say your dog was a herding dog, or for example, a guardian breed or a sports type dog that was going to do, other types of activities, a lot of what drives their behavior comes from genetics. So if we were to get a Great Pyrenees or Great Pyrenees mix, we tend to run into guarding type behaviors because of the fact that for many generations, that's what that dog has been bred to do. So I'm not saying that we don't want our herding animals to be, for example, like herders, like cattle dogs and collies and a few other friends. So right here, Ziva is a little bit unsure about some of the noises. Ziva. Yes. So a lot of times we would clump behavior as good or bad. So remember that some behavior, again, even though we've deemed it not really acceptable from our society, like barking and lunging and growling, remember that that might be the only way your dog can communicate how they're feeling. So as I was saying earlier with Miss Little M, is view behavior as communication. So if we were to scold behavior, even though it's embarrassing to us to have the dog be pulling or lunging and barking, remember that when we suppress behavior, we don't actually get at the root cause. Why is my dog feeling this way? And then how can I help them through that difficult moment? So obviously, as I'm, talking and spewing, I'm working a few find its with Ms. Z. So that way, she's actually a little bit flustered also by my small 4-year-old, so human. So Ebba will come here and help me on Tuesdays and Thursdays while she's not away at preschool, which is on the other days. So Ziva, while she's out, she sometimes notices her playing on her little mat and rolling around and doing her own thing. So, but notice how when Ms. Z went to start barking, I didn't scold. And I'm not saying this is what you guys are doing. But a lot of times we get overwhelmed when the dog gets overwhelmed. So sometimes we get tighter on the gear. We become restrictive in their movement. A lot of that causes more of a bigger fight response because flight is definitely taken out of the equation. So yes. So Ms. Z does have some really nice foundation behaviors, but remember, just like I've mentioned in the past, is if you're not feeling comfortable, those behaviors are out the window. So even though your dog might have great loose leash walking in and around the home or the yard, if we haven't created a big enough base of some of these behaviors before needing them in the real world, and if we're just going for a real world walk, yes, and maybe Miss Z can't handle a dog or novel distraction. We want to take a break or almost a vacation from having her be failing. So if your babe, right here, Ziva. So let's say I lose her a little bit to the distraction, I'm getting a little closer. Yes. And then feed her for that little check-in. So I know you guys had mentioned that she has a hard time on walks. She has a hard time when things go by the home. Remember that about 75% of your training will be also management. So what can my dog do or not do? So right here, she's just checking out the perimeter. So I have a little fence up for all the babes. And what they end up doing is while my little one is off in the distance doing her thing, ready, Ziva? Yes, nice job. Then the dogs can bounce back and forth between either exploring on this side or that side up to the fence line and then working from the environment back to me. So all I'm doing for Ms. Z, because she is a little bit of a sensitive woman, we've always known she's a little bit sort of nervous when we first met. So I don't feel you have to, again, go medication. But remember that if your dog's world is always a level 5 and above, and they can really only tolerate, like, let's say 3 and below, yes. This doesn't mean that I am saying medication is your only route, but I would highly recommend gauge how comfortable does she actually feel throughout the day in her own yard. And then also when going for little adventures around the zone, if again, I mentioned earlier, those are too hard for her, I want you to take a break. So this doesn't mean you're not going to exercise your dog. It just means that you're going to exercise her in a place where she's not getting bombarded by the environment or feeling so overwhelmed that she's flooded by the situation and then becomes explosive. So I know I had sent this along earlier, but I'm going to send it along to all of the doggy day school students, is some documents, some other resources when it comes to visuals, as well as for homework, if you can, again, jot out your green, yellow, and red, almost like a set of lights. Green is where she does amazing. So it could be little bullet points, like she does great in the living room. She does amazing in the kitchen. She's not as responsive in the backyard, so maybe that could be a yellow. Red would be when things go by the home, or if she heard a funny noise, or whatever she finds is overwhelming or triggering to the point where Ms. Z is non-responsive. So there's no bounce back, there's no taking food, there's no understanding of what you may have worked previously for skill set. So if you're finding that it's happening to any of the babes from puppies to adolescents to adults, then that means you're actually not exposing them and showing them new things to build up better associations, but reinforcing the fact that when we do these things, they are going to be scary. They are going to be overwhelming. The only way you're going to feel safe is by having your outbursts. So remember that puppies and dogs don't grow out of behavior, they grow into it. So especially when you're dealing with adolescents, because she's about 14 months, I believe you mentioned. So she's still going through her lovely teenagehood until she's about 2, maybe even 2.5. If she matures a little bit later, that's okay. But you'll see that she's going and giving out a lot of stress signals. So the dilated pupils have actually gotten better now that we've been doing some of these find its, and she's getting more comfortable again with the environment, with me as her handler for now. But like I tell all the students that are doing doggy day school, remember, this is a lot for your babe to just take in, especially for their first day. So they're away from their family. They're back in the classroom setting where normally that's with you guys. So this doesn't mean doggy day school won't be amazing for her. I think it's going to be really, really nice, because kind of view it like Dancing with the Stars. So let's say, for example, I know the dance moves, but she doesn't. I can start to help your dance partner look really nice and start to understand how to do those skills. So that way, when you guys are practicing at home, before you go out on stage, you guys can work that foundation and go from there. So Ziva, she's like, but I'm really interested. Yes, nice job. So, but back to some of those stress signals, you'll see that she is still taking food right now. When she first came out, she didn't really go for the food as much, which means that her comfort range wasn't there, which also means that her learning wouldn't be there. So if she doesn't take food outside, if she doesn't take food under certain circumstances, you're probably just flooding her with the situation and not actually helping her change her feelings around the thing. So for stress signals, she's done a couple moments where she stops and pauses and itches. She's also been doing some pacing and some whining. She has also been doing some paw lifts or a paw raise, which is not the same thing as high five. She's like, who lives outside? We did go out for a potty break, so she did do well in the little potty zone. But you can see that there's still some anxiousness going on. So obviously the first day is always the hardest. Ready, Ziva? But as opposed to saying like knock it off or whatever it might be, I'm just going to help her by doing a couple little find its and go from there. Ready? Find it. So when you're seeing some stress signals, this doesn't mean that your dog is melting into a puddle and she won't do okay, but there are things to look out for. So if she's already at the low end of the spectrum whispering that she's feeling a little bit unsure, and if we were to push to like, doing things she finds already hard, you might actually set her up for the explosion. So remember, we might even do what's called trigger stacking, where it could be one thing after another. It doesn't always have to be negative. It could be really exciting, a little overwhelming, all of a sudden a big noise. And then maybe all of a sudden she just loses her marbles at something small that she would have been able to handle prior. But because she got so overwhelmed because of all the things one after the other, she just lost it. So it can happen to us too. Like we wake up late for work, we're rushing, we have car trouble, then we're again more overwhelmed. Then all of a sudden maybe you get to work and your boss doesn't say the nicest thing to you. And then it's a very yuck kind of day. So you might not be in the greatest mood when you come home. You may not be the sweetest person to chat with. This doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means at that moment you're struggling with the day you've had and with the emotions and feelings you have within. So nice job checking in cuteness. But she's also throwing out dilated pupils in the beginning. She's also been panting pretty excessively. So when you see spatula tongue, which I know I've mentioned when I was working with a few other sensitive dogs too, Ziva. Yes, nice job. Great name recognition, madam. Good girl. So when you're working with dogs, remember that most of their communication might be nonverbal, so body language, and then a lot of it can also turn into vocalizations as well. But when you see a spatula tongue and they haven't been exercising, they haven't been in a very hot environment, it's typically stress. So when you see those spatula tongue, it's like the very tip of their tongue, but it's out and wide and just sticking out. So it looks a little bit like a spatula. Ziva. Yes. So you'll see that hers is kind of sticking out. Of course, your dog will pant when they're a little unsure about something. And when she was playing actually a little bit earlier with the flirt pole, so I'm going to see if I can get her to do some more playing. Playing is also a great way to boost comfort and confidence in these novel environments. But then you could use play to build her comfort around things off in the distance that could be triggers or distractions down the road. But if you lose food drive, toy drive, and all of her usual fun adventures, then that means, again, we're going more into flooding than we are into, changing behavior responses, which would be more through counter conditioning. So counter conditioning would be where she sees my little human, for example, and let's say she thinks that is a bit spooky. Within her comfort range, I would have Ms. Z practicing where she feels safe enough noticing or checking it out, but not be over threshold. So I'm gonna go, Ziva, see if I can get her to check in. Ready? She's like, there was a crumb she missed. Yes, good girl. Nice work, madam. But if, let's say, the little human child is a bit spooky, we'd want to pair it with easy peasy things far enough away where she feels safe enough to offer behavior, but then start to pair something as simple as find it with that thing off in the distance. If, again, she's sensitive to for example, sounds versus visuals, I love using Spotify and picking noises that are non-threatening. So you wouldn't, if let's say she loses her marbles at a doorbell, I would not go ahead and play doorbell noises where she just goes and gets overwhelmed and then there's no thoughts behind it. So ready, find it. So if, let's say, wind chimes don't invigorate her to have a fear response or an overwhelming situation, we could then have those noises playing at a very low volume, pair it with fun things like tugging, playing with a ball, doing find its. Nice job, cuteness. And then what you'd end up doing is start to make it where when she hears those funny noises, it's the bringer of good. So you can start to change the emotional or physical response to those things to create a positive association versus a melting, overwhelming, or reactivity moment. So ready? Ziva. Yes. So we're going to go into working a few lovely skills with Miss Z. So for example, one of my favorites is this reorientation back to you. You could even do this on a longer leash out in the yard, but I would recommend warm up with these skills in a very comfortable environment, which could be in your house. So we might go, ready, find it, have her go search for her snack, and then go, Ziva, yes. This could be name recognition, or I call it name cookie on the document as well. You could, again, do the positive interrupter. You could also throw in Ziva, come, and feed her for that. But if, let's say, recalls are sometimes the end of fun, I would be careful that your recall doesn't mean, hey, whatever you're doing, knock it off and come here, because then recalls start to equal negative. So we'll dive into more recall stuff as well. But for now, make it fun to, from the environment, either reorient to you or, ready, Ziva? She's like, my brain is melted already. If, for example, she's non-responsive, this could be her saying, oh my gosh, I'm exhausted. My brain's a little bit overwhelmed. So she's not in trouble because, again, scolding your dog for having a mistake is not going to make them want to work even more or harder for us. So remember, as I mentioned earlier, like with Miss M, if she's like a furry little exchange student that doesn't understand what to expect from us, we want to show her or prevent her from getting better at rehearsing the things we don't like. So I know I was mentioning rehearsal could be also in the sense of blocking the window so she can't go and rehearse checking out all those items. She's checking out my other playroom zone. So if, let's say, your puppy is able to window shop, which is again woo-wooing out the window or slider or whatever it might be, hi cuteness, then what your dog is actually getting good at is every time they see something, they say, oh my gosh, get away, I'm scared, I'm overwhelmed, and then they do walk by and they're all sort of scuttling away because they're going for a walk. Your dog is going to start to think, gee, good, that made them leave when I said get out of here, I'm overwhelmed and you're getting me nervous. And now your puppy thinks that every time she sees something, woo-wooing at it might be a great way to get energy out or frustration out. Ziva, yes. But what we're also working on is then she's getting good at thinking that that makes the spooky thing go away. So then more of that barking would get rehearsed throughout the day, and then it's probably going to go into other venues. So going for your walks, being in the backyard, whatever it might be for her, she might still start to trigger those things. Ready? Ziva. So I'm going to see if Ms. Z might offer a little bit of some other skills in just a moment. Maybe she has to go for a little potty, but if she's up on the door, I'm just going to help her off the door, and then we'll go into a little find it, give her a little breather. But we're going to work, again, a little bit with some other skills and see how Ms. Z is coming along. She did very well for this first little session.